This episode of Distraction is sponsored by Landmark College in beautiful Putney, Vermont, offering bachelor's and associate programs, short-term and summer programs for students who learn differently. To schedule a campus visit or to learn more, visit lcdistraction.org. And can any man in the street get onto the Darknet?
The Darknet is accessible by individuals, anybody in the United States.
How do they do it?
Well, I don't usually talk about that on air because I don't want everybody to go on there.
Yeah. Well, okay, good. Hi, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell, and you're listening to Distraction, the podcast. I'm really happy today to welcome our guest, Dr. Lisa Strohman, who is an expert on the use of technology. I was just talking to her on the phone, and she'll be joining us in a second. I was saying it is the number one issue parents ask me about. Before anything else, they say, how do we deal with screen time? But it's certainly not just an issue for children. Marriages break up over this. It is the latest addictive substance, screens. And we just aren't doing a very good job of learning how to control it. Abstinence is not an option because, to live in today's world, you have to be able to access electronic communication technology. But the analogy I use is with food. You have to learn moderation with food, and you have to learn moderation with electronics. Well, Dr. Strohman is an expert in this. She's a clinical psychologist, the author of a book called Unplug, Raising Kids in a Technology-Addicted World, and really is tackling in a deep way an extremely important problem that 25 years ago, or even 10 years ago, didn't exist. So we don't have history to look back to figure out how to make sense of it. So welcome to Distraction, Dr. Strohman.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, really nice to have you. So tell us, give us some background. How did you get into this field, and what have you discovered?
So I came into this field probably a backwards way, I would say. I originally before I had children, had worked in the FBI in a child abduction serial killer profiling unit.
Wow.
And during that tenure, I was an intern, and then I was a visiting scholar with them. And I was also able to go and do tours with NSA, CIA, and the Bureau's Internet Crimes Against Children units. And so I saw of our very high-level security of our country, all of this Internet, Darknet stuff that was happening to children. And this is over 15 years ago.
Wow.
Before I had kids. And so that's, as I started practicing, after I finished my degree and my dissertation, I realized that this was something that was impacting people on, even just like you said, children and adults, marriages. And so I started to look into the science and the research behind it. So that's kind of how I got here.
Wow. So through the FBI and serial killers,
right.
and really seeing and you mentioned the Darknet. For our listeners, what exactly is the Darknet?
So from a technical standpoint, for military purposes, there's the ClearNet, which is what we call the Internet.
Uh-huh.
And that means that it's what our consumers use, everything there. And about 30% of the online world uses that. And there's another 30% that the military uses for specific operations that is devoid of any sort of consumers or retail people on there.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the Darknet. That's another 25 to 30%, which is it's basically under what we call the onion router, but it's secure servers that bounce between all these other countries so that actually nobody can trace anything that goes on in there. And it has a lot of nefarious Machiavellian type people on there doing very bad things.
Wow. Like what kind of things get done on there?
There's hitmen for hire. I mean, there's essentially, if you want to buy any kind of drug, illicit drug in the United States or a prescription drug, they have they have basically consumer-ready positions where URLs that you can go to, and it might be Cocaine R Us. and they are boldly selling, just like you would on Amazon, different sorts of grades of cocaine. There's hitmen, there's organs, there's lots of things that you can buy on there.
Can any man in the street get onto the Darknet?
The Darknet is accessible by individuals, anybody in the United States. If they want to get on the Darknet, they can do that. Yeah.
How do they do it?
Well, I don't usually talk about that on air because I don't want everybody to go on there.
Yeah. Well, okay, good. I mean,
horrors,
but someone could find out if they wanted to.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're really motivated to do that, I would caution listeners that, the people who go on the Darknet are there because they're trying to do things that aren't legal, and they're not upstanding individuals.
Right.
And so just like I tell my teenagers that go on the internet itself, I said, if you're going to go into a crowd of people and start talking to people that you don't know, and that makes you feel comfortable, then by all means, the internet's a place for you. But if that makes you nervous, then you need to be a little bit more cautious. And the Darknet is that times 1,000.
Wow, so that's basically don't go there.
I wouldn't recommend it because there's a lot of agents, there's a lot of people that are trying to help keep, just even the looky-loos, I would call them, like going in to see what it's all about.
Right.
Trying to keep them safe, because all of your information, once you log in there, is up for grabs for anybody that's on there.
Oh, so absolutely don't go there. Just for the voyeuristic pleasure of it, don't go there, because you're putting your entire identity at risk. Gosh, there's no way to shut this Darknet down?
So Silk Road, I don't know if you remember that, but there was a huge operation that took down what we used to call Silk Road. And that was where drug purchases were being made. And that was the Darknet, maybe Mall of America, right? It had 20, maybe 1,000 people on there, and you could go in and get stuff that you wanted, false identities or hitmen or whatever you wanted. And they figured out and infiltrated it and was able to shut it down. The FBI, in collaboration with some other operations, went in and they shut it down, and it was like pulling up one of those dandelions on a windy day, and all of those seeds flew. And so the minute they shut down Silk Road, instead of having one Mall of America open, now there's hundreds of thousands. And so you saw the Darknet population explode at this point. So It's far worse than it's ever been at this point.
That's really scary.
It is quite frightening, absolutely. Yeah.
Boy.
Yeah, so when I have, like you were saying, parents are worried about screen time, it's, I have all this information in my head of, kids are curious, and so they go into these dark corners not knowing really where they're kind of stumbling into.
Boy, oh boy, what an important message we're getting. The best thing a person can do is just be aware of the Darknet and stay away from it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and advise your children if they ever have a friend saying, "Oh, let's do this," say, "No, I don't want to do this." It sounds like the absolute worst of humanity conglomerates on the Darknet. Oh, boy. Terrible.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. You've also explored this terrible story of cyberbullying. You want to tell our listeners that story? It's just horrifying.
So there was a young lady, 18 years old, a senior in high school, who for most of her high school career had been teased or bullied in what we would call a traditional sense for her weight. She was of a large family and had lots of friends, but always kind of struggled with her weight, which kids can be very cruel about.
Yes.
And in the last 4 to 5 months of her life, they had gotten so advanced in her senior year, they had created these false identities and used these apps and various ways to create false web pages, and were giving out her private information, her cell phone number, saying, "Give me a call for a good time, and this is what I do," and would list these horrific things. And she finally said, "Enough is enough. I can't take this anymore." And she sent her parents and her siblings a group text message, and just said, "Remember that I always love you. This is a Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I will always love you. I just can't do this anymore." And they rushed home, knowing that she'd been struggling with this issue. And as they rushed home, they got there in time. She had a gun to her chest, and her dad was convinced he could talk her out of hurting herself, but in actuality was unable to, and she ended up taking her life in front of her father and several of her siblings.
Oh my gosh! Oh, what a tragedy! And obviously this was caused by. Cyberbullying sounds so tame compared to what happened. It'd been just rank, chronic, sadistic torture of this girl for years, you say.
Yeah, I think that, again, she struggled with that self-concept because I think society, particularly for women,
yes,
is not very kind.
Oh, it's horrible. It's incredibly cruel. Yeah.
So that's the part that I think that with her own insecurities and trying to figure out how to manage that, and then the advent of texting and apps and social media and how you can't ever escape from it. It's a 24/7 problem.
Well, if she had been lucky enough to come to the Technology Wellness Center looking for help.
So a lot of times when I get these calls, I actually will work with families by getting them in contact with Internet Crimes Against Children. I still have a very strong relationship with the law enforcement community and work with them. So I get them in charge of actual experts that know how to go in and infiltrate some of these quote-unquote anonymous apps, because there's really actually nothing anonymous on websites.
Right.
But when you go to a school or you go to kind of a local police department that isn't skilled or doesn't have the personnel on place, they really can't do what needs to happen at that moment. So I also counsel the family in terms of the suicide risk, how high it is right now with this age group, and how you don't take these things for granted. I always say remove guns, remove any sort of prescription or medication. Obviously do welfare checks on the kids, because you just can't tell with these kids. I see suicidal kids all the time because of this issue. I had 3, in fact, last week, and none of the parents had any idea.
Let me just stop you there. You see suicidal kids all the time.
All the time based on this issue.
Wow. Based on cyberbullying.
Based on cyberbullying, based on what's happening in school, that they can't escape it. Absolutely.
And is it usually females? Is it usually girls?
Actually, it's equal numbers.
Really?
This past week, I've had all boys.
Really? What do the boys get bullied about?
Various things. Typically with the boys, it's interesting. They tend to do kind of a gang group mentality. So if one of the boys decides to kind of jump on and attack somebody, and the other boys join in, because that's kind of how, it's the basic kind of Lord of the Flies principle that still exists in schools.
Yeah.
And a kid who might be an empath or somebody who's more emotional and acts like one of their friends who's doing these horrible things, I see a lot of that self-hate coming up with the boys that causes it, because they know what they're doing is wrong, and they start to hate themselves and feel very guilty over it. I think for the public, I think a lot of parents will come in and they say, oh, my son's a very sensitive kid, which, of course, they're going through puberty and nobody wants to be called sensitive.
Right.
But those kids tend to be ones that pick up on the emotions and have a little bit stronger affiliation with somebody's well-being.
So they're naturally
who doesn't.
Naturally empathic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And that's sort of a curse, because then they feel ashamed of their involvement.
Yes.
And they become suicidal because of what they've been involved in?
Most of the time, right. I mean, a lot of times they'll do something and then they'll get attacked because they've been so cruel and mean, just following kind of a whole gang of boys that are doing that. And then kids will weigh in and school will weigh in, and they just don't feel like there's a way to escape it, particularly when they do it online, because if they're writing things online or they're saying things online that they know are wrong, they understand that it's a public and permanent thing, and it doesn't go away.
Right.
So now, how do I get into college? How do I get my first job?
Right.
If I've said a racist remark or,
right. And you said the victims are equally male and female?
Right. The suicide rate for girls is much higher, but I would say that I don't want your listeners to think that if I have a son, I'm off the hook. The rates in the last 10 years for girls are up 200%, and the rates for boys are up 50%. So
you're
it's
talking
still
about
a very escalating
suicide rates.
Yes.
Well, if you figure for every suicide, there's got to be an awful lot of kids who are just very depressed and troubled and anxious.
So the anxiety rates among the middle, starting about 6th or 7th grade, is typically when I see the parents showing up and saying, what's going on with my kid? But the anxiety and depression rates are higher than I've ever seen in practice in 15 years.
Wow. At all ages? I mean, beginning, say, 6th grade?
Yeah, I would say it's different. With kids, it tends to be, my high school, middle high school, and high school kids, that tends to be more related to social media, really finding out who they are. When I get into the adult populations and figure out theirs is much different related. It has more to do with economics. It has more to do with keeping up with the Joneses. Their life isn't as happy as somebody else's life. So it's different reasons at different ages.
Are there other centers like yours around the country?
There's what I see happening is, and this is really specifically why I called it the Wellness Center, is I think that a lot of other places that are jumping into kind of the technology area are focusing on the addiction part. So a lot of the addiction centers that, cost $45,000 for a month, they're kind of jumping in and treating it as a pathology or an addiction.
Right.
And to your point, we have to treat it more like food, and it has to be something we learn to balance.
Right.
And I don't think pathologizing it makes or helps anybody get better.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's a problem in mental health in general. We scare people away with our pathologizing of everything, and it's supposed to be mental health, not mental sickness, and let's face it, with electronics, abstinence is just not an option, so it really is like food. We eat healthy. You use the electronics well, they're an incredible asset. Gosh, Lisa, you're doing incredible work. I mean, you ought to be this digital academy. So you're bringing that to schools around the country?
Right. So we just finished our beta in one of the schools here locally, and the Digital Citizen Academy is really teaching kids how to be better online citizens. So they don't become bullies, and they're not cheating, and they're not sexting, and they're not doing the stuff that can get them in trouble. And I'm a firm believer. If you teach kids when they're young, you can't have cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just like you were talking about food.
Yeah.
They won't.
Totally.
They'll eat balanced.
Totally. So and your curriculum ought to, I can't imagine any school that wouldn't want to include it. It ought to be a course that every kid takes, the Digital Academy. And learning, just like you learn to brush your teeth, you learn how to use your electronics.
Yeah, every school wants it. Not every school says that they can pay for it.
But Lisa, it's a classic pay me now or pay me later. If you don't pay for it, and these kids, you're putting them at tremendous risk of getting into huge trouble. They're so naive to the dangers.
Yes. And I think pointing it out to them, the number of suicides, the number of, academic issues, and, in fact, like we even created a diversion program because the suspension rates are so high with these kids doing stuff digitally. And they suspend them from actually in school, and so then they come home and then technology even more, and so it's not working.
Absolutely.
And so I said, well, here's a diversion program. How about that, where you do an in-school suspension so they can't go home, and then they have to address and learn why it's a bad thing for them. So, I think this will be my next phase, I would say.
So for listeners, if you're a parent or yourself as an adult, what advice would you have? They should get your book, Unplug, Raising Kids in a Technology-Addicted World.
It's a great resource for parents, and teachers.
Do you have a website they can go to?
I do. TechnologyWellnessCenter.com is the website.
TechnologyWellnessCenter.com.
Right. If there's schools that are interested in the Digital Citizen Academy, the same one, digitalcitizenacademy.org. That's that site.
Let's just say that again, digitalcitizenacademy.org, okay?
Yep. And my advice is just to keep balance. Be balanced in your use. And if you're going to be online 3 hours, then do something in real life for 3 hours. You cannot allow your brain to go so long on technology without having real life experiences. The neural network needs to have balance. And so if we can we can focus on balance, you can have a healthy relationship with technology.
Yeah, I tell people balance the electronic moment with the human moment.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's great.
The human moment is live and in person, and we all know what the electronic moment is. But a lot of people have let the electronic moment just overrun their lives. They get almost no human moments.
Correct. It's safer and it's easier.
So much safer, but as you know, really very much more dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, everyone ought to know about you. Lisa Strohman, Strohman. She is a lawyer and a psychologist, and more than that, a pioneer, a visionary. And she's one of those people who has an idea and actually implements it, actually makes it happen. I am so impressed with you.
Thank you.
The Technology Wellness Center and the website technologywellnesscenter.com, and her book Unplug: Raising Kids in a Technology-Addicted World. Get the book, visit the website. This is a huge issue that is facing the world, not just our country. I mean, when she says, I see suicidal kids all the time, let's pay attention to this and listen to Dr. Strohman, learn from her, bring her academy school program into your school, lobby with the schools to buy it. It's, gosh, what a good investment that would be, and to make these kids safe from the dangers of the internet, not to mention the darknet. And, it's really a life skill you need to have in today's world. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Strohman. Thank you.
So nice. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Many thanks again to Dr. Lisa Strohman for speaking with us. We'll put a link to her website and book on our website. Well, that's our show for today. If you have a question or comment about today's episode or about anything, please reach out to us by emailing connect@distractionpodcast.com. That's the word connect at distractionpodcast.com. Or call us at 1-844-55-CONNECT. Again, that's 1-844-55-CONNECT. Distraction is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. Our producer is Sarah Gurton, our sound engineer is Scott Person, and our music was created by Mark Berman.